I want to welcome everybody, especially our panelists, José Muñoz, Ciera Hammond, and Maria Maldonado, as well as Natanael. Sorry, Natanael, I missed your last name.
Chavez.
Chavez, Natanael Chavez. And a late addition to our panel. Thank you so much, Natanael, for joining us, and also Melissa Padilla and others. I'm going to be very brief because there's a lot of expertise assembled here on an urgent topic. And so in brief, let me introduce our panelists. We're going to hear first from Ciera Hammond, who is a graduating senior. She's the Director of External Affairs at ASI. She's also the Director of our local Complete Count Committee. She's going to get us oriented a little bit in terms of the census and how it affects you, specifically here on campus. We're then going to hear from my colleague in Social and Behavioral Sciences, José Muñoz, who is Associate Professor of Sociology and has a great deal of expertise as a researcher on this topic. And then we're going to hear from Maria Maldonado from the Undocumented Student Success Center, as well as Natanael Chavez, who is from the El Sol group, and he's also going to be telling us a lot about his work related directly to the US Census 2020. So I told you it was brief. I'm going to get out of the way and turn the floor over to Ciera, please.
Hi, yes, thank you so much, Dr. Murray. So as he said, I am the chair of our Complete Count Committee and the Director of External Affairs for the Associated Students. And so what I'm going to present today is a little bit more of the census from a student's perspective. So just an overview of what the census is, because I know it can be a little bit confusing because we also use the word census to signify the last add or drop date on our campus. But so the US Census happens every 10 years, and it's really important for a variety of reasons. So first of all, it determines how the federal budget is allocated. So every year or every 10 years, the federal government redesigns how it's going to allocate all of the money that it generates from revenue, such as taxes. So where that money goes is determined by how many people are in each area. So for example, I don't know if any students are in this Zoom call, but one of the things that the census affects is Pell Grants. So it looks at income and things like that, and will allocate the amount of money needed to that area for things like Pell Grants, for school lunches, for fire departments, police departments, and also for public works projects such as potholes. So I don't know how many of you students have ever been driving down, or faculty or staff have been driving down University Parkway and you hit a pothole, and it could be devastating for your car and your bank account. So all the more reason to respond to the census. It's so important, but it also has implications with respect to representation in our federal and state legislatures. So we have what are called districts in our political system, and that's how we vote. So we have the Senate, which is equal representation, and the House of Representatives, which is representation based on population. So we determine these districts within California that are somewhat of equal size, and that's how we elect the people who represent us. Now, if you don't respond to the census, then that means that your voice isn't going to be heard or equally represented in our House of Representatives or in our state assembly. So we really want to make sure that your voice matters your voice matters just as much as anybody else's, but we want to make sure that politically speaking, you are entitled to the same representation as people in other places. So that's most of what I have from like the student's perspective, but it's really important. ASI is going to be putting out some videos on how to respond if you have been displaced by COVID-19 with respect to living in dorms or things like that. And yeah, so.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ciera. I basically wanted to make, well, first, thanks, Jeremy, for organizing this and inviting me. He brought this idea up maybe 3 months ago, so he's been fired up about talking about the census for a while. So I'm glad this worked out. Well, one of the first things I wanted to point out in terms of the census and COVID is that clearly COVID is revealing a lot of the inequalities that exist in our society, and certainly the needs that we have in terms of emergency services and funding for hospitals and personnel, I think the pandemic is revealing these very serious gaps. And certainly, I think some of the folks that signed in today should be able to speak on how the outreach on the census has changed. So I'd be interested in hearing more about that. Certainly, that's going to impact the count. And I also wanted to say that I'm also interested in learning as the year moves on, how maybe market research is impacted, how social science is impacted by the pandemic and the use of the census, right? Because we're going to have, there's going to be some issues with the count, yeah? And how might the social sciences, where we do use this kind of data, how are we adapting to some of the gaps that might emerge in this particular count? I'm also interested in understanding how the census has advocated for Latinos to answer the census. What's changed during the pandemic? Certainly, we saw more efforts on Twitter, for example, to get people to answer the census. I'm also interested in learning what's been the role of Latino social movement or community-based organizations and Latino politicians in promoting the census. What have been some of their strategies in trying to adapt not only to the pandemic, but what were some of the strategies leading into getting people to answer the census before the pandemic took place, or before we went into the shelter in place. One of the areas that interests me in terms of my research is migrant civic engagement. And I'm in thinking about this particular event, I'm wondering if we can imagine the census as a document in which people engage, and perhaps it being a measure of engagement, okay? One is, how does the government engage its population, and more specifically, the migrant population or the foreign-born population, to put it more broadly. And then how does this population engage with this particular document? Is it a form of incorporation? Is it a form of doing their civic duty? Is it a way in which they feel a part of this society? I'm wondering, I mean, I have no data on this, but if we think about civic engagement, clearly, I think we can look at this document, this survey, as a way of thinking about how migrants can participate in the society, or how the foreign-born can participate in this society. And then what are the mechanisms that mediate this kind of engagement? Certainly social media, political groups, perhaps even the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the foreign-born might be a mediating factor to get the foreign-born to participate and answer the census. I'm also curious about how we learn later, perhaps researchers looking at how migrants see this as a form of surveillance, or potentially as a form of surveillance, given our current political system. Certainly we have foreign-born populations that come to the US that have fled or left governments where they didn't trust the political system, and now they find themselves in a political system that is in many ways untrustworthy, right? People putting children in cages, potentially extra surveillance on migrant populations. And certainly we can go back in time and think about how the census was used to, in turn, Japanese migrants and Japanese Americans, right? The census played a role in sort of finding this population in order to intern them. So this is one of the themes that I think we'll learn as researchers begin to explore the outcomes of the census. I think it's certainly an important count, but I think we'll learn more about how the Latino and migrant population feel about their participation in this kind in this kind of instrument. Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover, and I'll hand this off to our next presenter.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Maria Maldonado. I am the coordinator for the Undocumented Student Success Center at Cal State San Bernardino. And more than anything, my role here is to bring awareness, to bring a light to the fears that undocumented people are facing when completing the census, right? Some of the conversations that I've had with students, students coming to me and telling me, should I fill it out? Like, you know, is there a possibility that I would get deported if I fill this out? So really educating students on the importance of filling out the census and how they do not ask for their citizenship status. There is no question about that, and really walking them through the steps of completing the census. So I did invite Natanael here, who is someone I tend to refer students to when it comes to filling out the census, because I know he's someone that works closely with them, and he can you know, deeply relate to a lot of our migrant communities, our undocumented communities. So he is someone that students trust and that students go to when filling out the census. So I will let him talk a little bit more about that. But I do want everybody to know, you know, these are some of the conversations that we are having with our students. Their parents calling our center and asking, is it safe to fill it out? And us letting them know, like, yes, it's important, you're in good hands, right? And especially even like with my own family, with my own parents, when we first were introduced to the census, you know, you're stuck. My dad, somebody knocked on our door, and my dad was like, what is this about, right? And it wasn't until they fully informed him what it was and what it does, then this time around, my dad is like, oh, we have to fill it out. And he actually already completed it. And I asked him, and he was like, oh yeah, it's been done. And I'm like, oh, look at you, like, very proud, right? But it's all about providing the proper information to our communities and really letting them know the importance of them completing the census and removing that fear and that stigma that comes with filling out any form when you are an undocumented family, right? Or a mixed status family. When you have someone in your family who does not have any form of legal status, it is important for us to really provide that education. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Natanael, who I know will speak a little bit more on that.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Jeremy, for this time allocated. Thank you, my dear, for the invitation also. And if I do lose a little bit of sound, please let me know. I have been having some technical issues with my Bluetooth this morning. So thank you all for the invitation. And I'm Natanael Chavez. I am the lead coordinator for the Census Outreach in the High Desert. We are the lead promoters. We've been working with the census for a few months now with some ACBOs and majority with nonprofit organizations doing all the footwork, the canvassing before this previous to COVID-19, and now we switched to phone banking. So we've been doing most of the footwork, most of the trainings, trust and messenger trainings from former community, especially like Maria said, especially the hard account community. That's what we focus on, undocumented individuals. Me, myself, I'm an undocumented student, so I feel I can relate to them, and that's where I reach out to them. And provide trainings for them in case they are scared or they have no knowledge, because I do understand that not understanding what the form is or what it's for does bring them a kind of an uncertainty and not wanting to complete when it's beneficial for them. So that's what we do up in the High Desert. We are also doing the outreach through social media. And that's something that's been really going off right now. And it's really exciting to see what's happening with our social media. We've had people doing TikToks, doing videos. Right now they're doing skits, which is really exciting. We just had one organization the other day from the San Bernardino area. We are only with the High Desert, so I'm not in connection with them. But we do hear about what they do, because they posted a video of a guy saying, complete the census and you'll get a date with me. And people really, they really took a positive outcome from it. And I thought it was so funny. I was like, wow, like, you know, complete the census and you'll get a date with me. And when I saw it, I was like, that's really funny. And right now what we're trying to do at El Sol is that we're trying to get, right now the percentage has stopped a little bit, increasing from our 1 to 2% per week. So we're wondering why we've kind of plateaued a little bit. We've been having a great outcome. We have completed, surpassed the 50% completion, and we're close to completing that 2010 rate right now. So we surpassed it already. I apologize, we're about to surpass it. So we're really excited about that. But now we're just wondering, what can we do? What's something different that we can do with outreach to continue to motivate individuals to complete the census? And we've been working with, I see Melissa here, she's a specialist. I've been working with Douglas Hassett. He's a specialist up in the high desert. So we've had continuous contact with him. And right now, especially with what's going on with the whole COVID-19, the QEC is not opening up the questionnaire assistance centers for individuals to participate. So that's what our role is as regional coordinators in the high desert. I'll pass it back to Jeremy.
Thanks, Nathaniel. And I also want to thank Melissa for joining us. And I'd like to turn it over to Melissa. We have some other folks in here. We have a real wealth of knowledge in this among our awesome panelists. But also, I see some of my fellow historians, U.S. historians, Daisy and Michael, who are new additions to the department, going to join us soon. So, and also Ward McAfee. Hi, Ward. So we have lots of awesome people who are going to have lots of expertise on this in the historical context and anywhere else. So in terms of comments and anything else, I'd like you guys to join us. I first want to turn it over to Melissa because my expert panelists are telling me that Melissa is going to have a lot to share with us. So please go ahead, Melissa. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody, for inviting me, for allowing me to be here. For you, I'm Melissa Padilla. I'm a partnership specialist for the city of San Bernardino, and I'm being with the census for a year and a half, and I'm very happy to be here and share information. I'm gonna give a quick update for all of you. You might know this information, you might not, but right now we have census operations adjustments to COVID-19. So originally the deadline for the self-response questionnaire, it started on March 12th, and right now just got extended to October 31st. Before the deadline, it was July 31, so we move it for 3 months. So that's great because we're gonna have 3 more months to have a complete and accurate count for all our communities. Also, Cal State is on the group quarters. So as well, this operations, originally it started on April 2nd, and the deadline, it was gonna be June the 5th. Now it just moved to September the 3rd. So that's great news too, because we need to make sure that we count all of our students and in order to receive those fundings for Cal State. So as well, if I can have the information of the person who has all that, it will be greatly appreciated, so I can pass over that to our ACO. And as well, we try to have our ACO, which is our area census office, activities will resume after June the 1st. And the area census office began returning to full staff capacity. So there's many adjustments to COVID-19. Right now we're working on update leave as well operation, which this is our census takers drop off invitations will go to each of our doors. Originally it was gonna start March 15th. It just moved to June the 13th. So this is for the people, for example, for Big Bear, that they don't receive email. They rely heavily on UL. So we're starting operations for that reason soon. Actually, our office might open next week, which is a great news. And lastly, we have our non-response follow-up. This it was gonna start on May 13th, and it was gonna end up on July 31. Now it's gonna start August 11th to October the 31st. So these are gonna be our enumerators, because we know as a census, not everybody is going to respond to self-questionnaire. So we need to do some follow-up. If for some same reason, we need to hire thousands of people to do this follow-up. So that operation is gonna start August 11. It will end up on October the 31st. And moving forward to a different topic, we have right now something going on is our experimental pulse survey to track temporal trends during pandemic. So this was very quick, actually. It's a small business pulse survey and a house pulse survey. These surveys are designed to be a short turnaround instrument that will provide valuable data to aid the post-pandemic recovery for households and small businesses. So this started on April the 23rd, and it's gonna go all the way 90 days after. And this is for the COVID-19, and we need to have this data. It's gonna be extremely, extremely important. And that's something that Jose was mentioning before on his call. And but most importantly, we want to remind you to please respond to the questionnaire. It's only 9 simple questions. And right now, the city of San Bernardino, where Cal State is, it's at 55.2%. Last week on Wednesday was at 50.3%. So it's been increasing every week, like 0.7 around to 1%. So we're doing very good. We're doing very good, but we would love to see those numbers increase and have hopefully we can have 100%. But San Bernardino has been historically undercount, and we want to make sure that this 2020 we have a complete and accurate count. And that is pretty much all from my part. If you have any questions, it's open right now. But thank you so much for letting me have this space to share this information with you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was excellent, and a lot of really good information already. And this event is being recorded, so if people want to go back over this, I can also ask our panelists for some links to online websites where they can get follow up on a lot of this information. And I can then share the video along with links with anybody who wants to email and request that. I may also send out one of my notorious campus-wide emails that fill up everybody's inboxes. With a link to this video as well as other resources. I first want to ask, do any of our panelists want to comment on what each other said or make any additions or supplemental remarks? And then in the meantime, to all of our attendees, please feel free to, you should be able to raise your hand. You can also post a question or thought, a comment in the comment section. But also please feel free to raise your hand or unmute your video and wave, and hopefully we'll be able to see you, and then we'll be able to continue the conversation. But Jose, please lead us off.
Yeah, I wanted to add something, which is I actually use the census in my classroom. I use it as an opportunity to think about data. My students will sometimes ask me if I'm getting paid by the census because I talk about the census so much in the last week or so of class. But we do I use very simple assignments. I have them look up the census tract information listed on American Fact Finder. And they use it to fill out a very simple table to think about the differences between their census tract and the national numbers. We use a website called Census Scope, where we look at more elaborate graphics on a particular area that the census has collected data on, and the students reflect on that. I also have the students reflect on the census itself, their experience in using the data, looking at this data, thinking about the way in which we could argue that the census constructs racial and ethnic categories, and we could argue imposes those categories on the US populace. I spend a lot of time focusing on the way in which the Latino category has been constructed, how that category has shifted like a lot of the other ethnic and racial categories have, but the Latino category is very interesting because it is not a racial category. But there has been a lot of advocacy by Latino groups in thinking about this category. We can even think about when it was introduced into the census. And so it's an opportunity for students to think about how categories are constructed, but it's also a way of thinking about how populations of people, how advocacy groups can confront the census, can challenge and contest those categories, right? We can think about mixed race populations and how multiracial movements led in part to the inclusion of additional racial categories, or the possibility of answering have a multiracial response to that census. We can look at, let's say, the efforts by the Arab American community to think about how a category for this community could be included on the census, because we're talking about over $1 trillion, right? And having your community represented on in that survey count is really important, right? In terms of, like I said before, the services, emergency, health, schools, roads, right? And so I try to come at the students through a variety of ways as to why the census is important for their lives, and how we can think about this particular survey as an appropriate way to study not only the population, but other kinds of constructs that people might be interested in.
Thanks, Jose. Did any of our panelists want to look? We have a question in the chat. Oh, from Daisy. Daisy, I was just going to put you on the spot. Actually, I was just going to say, because these questions of representation, and so if you want to go ahead and unmute and share your thoughts. I was thinking about, should I put my new history colleague on the spot here? But please go ahead. Daisy Ocampo is going to be joining us in the history department in the fall, and her work with indigenous communities I thought was especially relevant to this event. Please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, cool. Well, my question or my thoughts was really looking at the critique of the US Census as like an apparatus, a tool of assimilation. I think especially when you look at the census in Mexico, there is that specificity that is marked, that is recorded, that is used for, public works and social programs. However, when people, migrate here to the US, you have this erasure of that local identity, which is very important, and often it's their primary identification, right? So that, back in Mexico, they could be Kumeyaay, right, from Baja, and then they suddenly go to San Diego and they're marked Mexican, right? So I was just really curious how the US Census is working to reconcile that. And are there workshops or anything that is prepping people to be able to mark a racial category that best represents their ethnicity, culture, and language, and opposed to a nationality?
Thank you. I can respond to that question. Thank you, Daisy. That is a very, very interesting, very good question. This census, this questionnaire is, first of all, we've been doing it since 1790. So we have more than 200 years collecting people's data. And this census is very unique. And I also agree with you. I'm a Mexican, I'm Mexicana. I was born in San Diego, but I grew up in Tijuana. And I consider myself as an Aztec because all Mexicans or Mexicans, they are Aztecs. So on this questionnaire, before we didn't identify with the Mexican or Aztec, we just put white, and we didn't identify with that ratio. And right now on this questionnaire, we are asking, are you Latina? Are you Mexican? So you can say yes or no. That's one question. And then we have another question asking if you're Native American. Mm-hmm. And you cross over that question, and then it asks you, is it Aztec? Is it Mayan? Now we have the opportunity to, what are we? What racial we are? So that's something amazing, that is beautiful, because not only for Mexicans, it can be from South America, it can be many, many other. So yes, this census is gonna be unique. And also, I'm gonna start providing self-response guidance webinars in English and Spanish, so I can walk over people on those 9 questions and help them out to respond it as the best we can. So yes, now we're gonna be able to identify ourselves, which is great news. I already respond mine, and I put I'm an Aztec.
Okay. Awesome, thank you.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Okay, well, my name is Christine. I just have a question. So that's probably a silly question, but why do you think people see this more of a surveillance than they do a benefit, as far as like regarding the more that you can count of the population, that it's going to be more of a benefit of distribution of funds? Why do people see this more as surveillance versus funding benefits?
The point I was making is that people feel surveilled. They feel surveilled. So we can look at the undocumented population and stories about how they feel like they're always being watched, and their behavior adapts to that idea that the state is always looking at you. So I don't think it's a stretch to think that this is potentially another way for people to feel like the government is watching them. And so in that sense, you could think about this as a kind of surveillance, that the government is using this instrument that could be used later. And I think we see that with the initial push for a citizenship question on the census, and the fears that probably sparked. I'd be curious to know how this, I mean, when we compare the numbers, how this might have shaped the response rate, right? We could compare, we could maybe compare rhetoric that the census has used to get Latinos to answer the census in the past. How has this changed now, given what's been said about the census? How do you fix that? How do you fix that idea that citizenship, like how do you dispel or dispel people of that fear that you're going to be asked about your citizenship, right? So the damage in some ways, I think has been done. I don't know how you complete, how you recover from that. I'd be interested to hear what are the strategies to get people to no longer be fearful. I'd be curious to know what those strategies are, what techniques people have used to sort of dispel that kind of.
So then that was a pretty good question then to ask you.
It's a great question, Christine.
Yeah.
And I think you're doing it now, Jose. I think this sort of event is really important. This was initially something that really made me feel that this would be an important thing to sort of bring together the super friends of various different approaches to this issue with Jose and others. But I think that's a really important thing, dispelling that myth. And it gets to the question of equity and equality, which I think is important for us to, an important conversation, because you hear it around voting as well. You hear people say, well, one person, one vote, but then you also have intimidation, voter intimidation. We have obviously a very complex history in this country of not only voter intimidation, but institutional disenfranchisement. And now I think this idea of sort of in the margins, what happens is a sort of gray area disenfranchisement, like introducing the idea that there might be a citizenship question into the discourse, into the conversation, which ultimately effectively drives some people away from the census or drives people away from the polls because they feel they're going to be intimidated or further weakened or disenfranchised. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jose and Christine, but I see Melissa, you wanted to follow up, and Jose, please go ahead.
No,
I have a question again. Why not just leave have and identify yourself as a particular race, I know this probably sounds totally stupid, but I guess it just kind of what I'm understanding is that you're still trying to figure out how to steer people away of the myth that they are being watched and surveillanced, and you want them to understand that this is more, from what I'm understanding, from what background that I've read, is that you want them to understand that this is more, again, I'm going to go back to that, more for a funding benefits, and you're still trying to figure out a way to take away people's fears or reduce those fears. Then do people have to specify like their race and all the other information that's asked? I mean, wouldn't that be kind of like a way to, I don't know, I'm even like,
Thanks, Christine. No, that's
I'm just thinking of like, yeah, ways, like, because you asked, well, we're still trying to, you obviously have not resolved how to take away those fields, and you're still trying to
It's
figure it out.
complex. Yeah, equity is really complicated. Melissa, please go ahead, and then Jose. Great
Thank
question,
you.
Christine.
Well, yes, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate, engage, and encourage people to respond to the questionnaire. And there's so many myths, and people are afraid, and especially the Latino community, they are afraid to respond to the questionnaire. And that's what we hear. We're trying to educate them. And first of all the response are protected by Title 13. So what this means, this information is not going to share with any federal government, with immigration, with ICE, with FBI. This is only for one purpose. It's about power, money, and representation. This decennial is only to know how many representatives we need on Congress and how much money we're going to receive. And this is where everybody can participate. Usually people who have not documents, they're not able to vote. But in the census, on this decennial, they have the opportunity to participate, to raise their voice. And the more people that we are, the more representation that we need. And we need that representation for our Latino community.
But where do these people get that they're being surveillance? Because I'm getting it, and I understand what you're saying, that you need to do a count of the population, again, for the funding, for the representation, and all of the stuff. But then where did the fear come from that people have?
Maria,
Where did this myth come from that you're being watched and surveillance? There had to be a reason for this.
It comes from different policies always being introduced to attack the undocumented community. Just most recently, it has been, Facebook, Instagram, social media. It's now being considered when applying for an adjustment of status. We are constantly being watched. Us sharing on social media the simple fact that we are undocumented and that we stand for undocumented people sometimes can bring, those eyes, right, onto us. People start creating reports to ICE. They start sending our images or photos. So yes, that fear comes from always being watched, constantly being watched. As soon as we say we are undocumented, we are putting ourselves at risk. There is that fear of us being deported, being separated from our families. And so that is going to exist always, because every time we have to fill out a form, it's like, well, how is this now going to be used against me?
I can see how that, yeah, I definitely, absolutely can see or feel how that would be a big fear, being separated from your family and whatever. Yeah, I definitely can see it. So, and I can see, kind of feel like it's almost like a trap that you're walking into. Nobody wants to take that risk. And I can understand that. Absolutely, 100%.
Thanks, Christine. Let's hear from Melissa, and Jose also wanted to weigh in, and then Hunter raised his hand there as well. Please, Melissa and Jose.
I want to give a reminder that if they don't feel comfortable responding a question, they don't need to respond it. We care more about how many people we have living in that house. For example, there's some people say, hey, Melissa, I don't feel comfortable putting my last name because I'm Padilla, because I'm Hernandez. So If they don't feel comfortable, they can put respondent 1, they can put respondent 2. If that is not a problem. What we care is how many people living in the house. That we will know how big of the piece of pie they will receive, that community and the resources for them. So any question, they don't feel comfortable, don't respond. But just make sure you participate. At least we need to know is a male, how many people. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I didn't have much to add other than something you said earlier, Jeremy. This event is important, but apart from a health disparity that exists in our society, there's also a digital one. So, I mean, there's no way in assuring that Latino or foreign-born populations are going to be able to see this. And I certainly like the idea that was raised by Melissa about webinars in Spanish and English, but what about a foreign-born migrant who's from an indigenous community that doesn't speak English? I mean, many of these communities, you don't speak Spanish, even though that's the national language. And coming to the US, I mean, your ability to learn English is going to be delayed depending on when you migrated. So it's great that the census is trying to capture an indigenous population, but from Latin America, we can't assume that all indigenous people come to the US with Spanish dominant skills, right? So I realize you can only do so much, but again, there are going to be these gaps.
Thanks, Jose. And I think the introduction of a sort of party line into the media, whether it's from the bully pulpit or some other avenue, it needs to be countered. And that's where work by Maria, Natanael, and Ciera and others becomes so important, to reach out and to try to counter those kind of myths. Hunter, you had your hand up, and then I saw Michael also had a question. Hunter, please go ahead.
So I have been keeping up with the news about the census, and a while ago that there were reports that people are afraid of the citizenship question. And earlier, Jose mentioned that the census has been used to round up Japanese Americans. So have there been other examples of the census being used by the government for their own personal gain or other interests?
I can't think of any. That was just the one case that I was aware of. Certainly that fear exists. I bring this up to my students. I mean, it's funny but not funny, but I point out that people are more than willing to fill out their tax, or they fill out their taxes, but when it comes to the census, there's clearly some fear. And part of this could be historic, well, it is historic. Perhaps you don't like, you come from a community where the government intrusion in what you're doing, the history of racial conflict in the society, when the government comes around, perhaps or we can look to periods when that interaction with government or governments hasn't been positive, so that carries over. But I can't think of any other case where we would find this kind of evidence. But I think it's something that people do think about.
Yeah, that actually was a perfect segue to. I just had a couple of follow-ups on a few different things actually that folks have been talking about. As far as the kind of historical background for other instances aside from Japanese internment, in the 1950s. Into the early 60s, Congress actually had started a termination program for different indigenous communities in the United States. And some of that was using census data, looking at tribes that they started to deem as no longer federally recognized, right? Which means that in doing so, the government, was no longer considering them, they call domestic wards, so they're no longer giving these benefits and federal services to these tribes that they started to just, say didn't exist anymore. So there's that's another example. And then also, with like the Dillingham Commission in the early in the 1910s, there's lots of immigrant communities being like heavily, getting a lot of surveillance and people asking them point blank if they're citizens or not. So there is in the United States a long history of this information in the 20th century, especially being used against certain people within the United States. So there's historical reasons, I think, aside from the current administration, pushing the citizenship question, that are legitimate. And that's why it is so great and why I wanted to be here with you all. Oh.
So I would like to add to that. There's something that we have been combating is that somebody's mentioned earlier about the censorship question. Since we are doing phone banking and we're doing canvassing, we have been we are combating misinformation that's out there on the streets. And there's also, as Melissa, I think I do not know what the emails are, but I think it's like rumors@census.gov, where you can just report if there's any rumors, and in case you hear any misinformation or things that are just not in the census and they're not. And you do hear some kind of information that's on there, it's always good to report it, because we are combating. We have heard that there's individuals going to your people's homes asking, informing them. We don't know if it's just individuals or if it's an organization going to homes or calling homes, informing the members that the census question is going to be on the questionnaire. So there's always going to be misinformation. The census is not perfect, but it's doing its best to capture almost everybody to the best of its ability. But there is going to be some kind of misinformation here and then, and individuals who are trying to bring a negative effect of it. So it's always best to report this. And I'll look up the email where we can report it to, or you can find out more rumors.
Thanks, Natanael. Those were my questions. I wanted to know what you guys are up to. So thanks. I don't know if I dropped out for a second. I got a phone call on my phone that shut me down. So if I seemed like I stopped in mid-sentence, or I don't know if I disappeared or not, but that's why I was zoned out. But anyway, thank you for following up, because that was one of my questions. And I had another follow-up question as well related to Daisy's about Indigenous communities in general still continue to be underrepresented in the census. Not just folks coming from Latin America, but also Native people, within what is currently the United States, also continue to be largely underrepresented on the census. And I was just wondering if in 2020, Melissa, you had, that there's different things people can check. Are there also new levels of outreach to Native communities in the county?
Yes, I can respond to that. So we have a partnership, a specialist only for Native Americans, and they also have their own logo, and only people who are Natives, they can reach out to them. So we try to hire people that are Native so they can do that reach out, because they have different boundaries and laws for them. But yes, we are. We have even a different logo for the census for Natives, and we have partnership specialists, especially for Native of America. And also adding, yes, there's a lot of people, they're misinforming, or they're knocking at doors and they're not census employees. Just want to make sure that this is our official credentials. So they need to have this is how we look, or this is a census employee. So if somebody knocks your door, make sure you see this badge that they have to display. That's very, very important. And also, as Natanael said, we have that census rumors email. Please make sure if you have any discrepancy or you hear something, please let us know so we can address it.
Thanks, Melissa. And and thanks, Dean Pantula Sestri, for your comment as well. The importance of representation, political representation, of course, is a big part of what we're talking about. The allocation of funds, political representation, all these things are part of this. And to the earlier discussion about intimidation, that kind of thing, I think there is a connection to the general sense of what the federal government is in your life. And Jose led off with some of these comments as well. And this, in terms of understanding disenfranchised communities, marginalized communities historically, is really important, because we have a legacy of something like redlining, which is the kind of real estate exclusion of African Americans from communities. But then also things like Jim Crow, and of course the internment of Americans of Japanese ancestry, and there is a kind of institutional intimidation that gets connected with the federal government as it touches people's lives if you're in a historically disenfranchised community. And that's a really important thing when we talk about equity versus equality that we have to counter, and it takes a lot of work. And I wanted to also just make sure we talked a little bit about opportunities, just in case anybody weighed in for the purpose of hearing a little bit of opportunities. That's Ciera and Melissa maybe, but others in terms of working as a volunteer or as a paid employee of the census, these sort of opportunities, just in case some of our attendees weighed in for that aspect. Can you guys jump in here? Maybe Ciera and Melissa.
I'll go ahead and let Melissa kick it off, just because most of our volunteer efforts were on campus. But if you do get involved with the census, shoot me an email, asi-dea@csusb.edu, and we have a super cool census, Let Your Howl Be Heard t-shirt that we can hook you up with.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, we have any jobs opportunities. The website is 2020census.gov/jobs. It's only 33 questions that you need to respond. You don't need to have experience to work with us. You just need to be 18 years old, be US citizen, and pass background check. We have positions right now. We're gonna need a lot of enumerators. We also have census field supervisors, and they're starting for enumerators is, I believe, it's $17.50. And also we're paying mileage, which is 57 cents per mile. And what I like about the census is great pay, it's flexible hours, weekly pay. We also pay training, and we are hiring people based on their zip code. Based on your zip code, that will be the area you're gonna be assigned, because our area census office is in San Bernardino. And the city of San Bernardino actually is on Hospitality Lane. So not everybody lives around that region. However, if you, for example, you get hired as an enumerator, basically your house will be your office. So when you go out, you start getting paid your mileage and your hours that you put. We will provide census computers. We will provide everything for them. It's very easy. Now you say, well, I want to consider for a clerk or for a recruiter, or okay, it's only one application for all these different positions. Based on how you respond, we will know where to place you. Now, if you have some experience as a supervisor, it's only 9 more questions. So in total will be 42 questions if you want to be considered. And what I like about the census field supervisor, you are working kind of more from home, and you will have 15 enumerators under you, approx. And it's just basically approving their hours, their workload, just making sure that your group is successful. And just keep in mind that having a federal job on your resume is gonna make such a big difference for the future. And right now, we're gonna start in operations. We're gonna start hiring a lot of people, more because we have the COVID-19. So there was an interrupt or a pause. And now they told us, you know what, we need more numbers. So right now it's a great time to apply. Again, the webpage, I'm gonna put it on the chat, is 2020census.gov/jobs. It's super easy, super quick. Make sure you guys apply today and spread out the word.
Thanks, Melissa. And I did put something there, and so please do add if there's a more precise website than the one that I put in the chat, please add that one as well, so that folks can find out more about that. And Natanael, also with your work as well, in terms of coordinating projects, there it is in the chat. Actually, just want to make sure that gets sent to everybody. I'll send that through right now. Okay. Natanael, did you have anything to add also about opportunities and volunteer work that you've been doing?
So as of right now, opportunities we do not have. I'm not in contact with their hiring with the nonprofit organizations. They each coordinate their own hiring. But I would love it if anybody could put their emails on here so I can send out just information, resources. We are working with a lot of food banks, different organizations working with different food banks in different locations, trying to create virtual QECs. And I would love it if everybody, so something we're doing at Sol is that we're trying to engage the community because we're trying to, it's one thing to lecture somebody, but that's not as fun as when you are engaging with the community. So something we're trying to do is make a quick video of just of the staff members at Sol or any other organization, but videos of them also participating with us. So I want to connect all this content together. So I would love it if everybody could just put your email so I can save it and send you emails of trainings or just events that we're doing to participate in, which would be really fun. Activities to post on social media. That's something that we're really trying to aim at right now with social media outreach, with webinars, videos. There's a lot going on right now. A lot of census, you know, this coming up week, I think it's Census Day at Census. Give me one, let me pull it up. We just had our meeting this morning. It is Census Day of Action, just is coming up week. We've noticed with the metrics that we take, we're working with Media Ventures, and they weekly update us on how our social media outreach is doing. And this coming up week, according to the metrics that we've taken for the last 3 months, the end of the month is always the most active week of the census, according to the response that we get on the social media. So we're going to be providing trainings. Other organizations are going to be providing QECs online, virtual QECs. So it would be great if you can just put your email, and I can share this with the organizations, and maybe they'll send you just reminders or invitations to participate.
Thanks, Natanael. And then Ciera, did you want to follow up on this? And Natanael, if you want to also add your email there, just in case somebody puts their email but somehow doesn't get on the list or something like that, if you want to add your email, Natanael, and then folks can reach out to you as well to get on those lists. Ciera, please.
Yeah, so I think especially at CSUSB, we have our complete count committee. So we are, our goal is to educate the CSUSB campus community and surrounding community about what the census is, what the purpose of it is for. So if you would like to be informed about when our meetings are, you can totally attend. So if you would like to attend, please just shoot your email to me privately in the chat, and I'll make sure that you get a Zoom invite.
Thanks. This has been really, really helpful. We still have plenty of people in here who haven't jumped in. Thanks, Steve Pantua. Thanks, Sastry. If anybody wants to jump in with questions now, we've got a reasonably small group, so so please do feel free and identify yourself for the rest of us, so we know who you are. But if I don't want to keep everybody here over long, but at the same time, this has been a really rich conversation. So if others want to jump in with questions, as Christine found, there are absolutely no stupid questions here. These are experts who can answer some really fundamental questions that we have about the census, and its role and its presence in the culture and the community. So it's a really great questions from Christine and Hunter, and comments from Daisy and Michael and Sastry. So please don't hesitate if anybody wants to jump in here. All right.
I forgot something I would like to mention. Bring up
please.
is something that I'm really excited about. I'm not sure it'll happen or not. Something we saw in San Francisco was, as everybody knows right now, they're doing the car drives, the car caravans, and drive for birthdays. But something that happened in San Francisco, correct me if I'm wrong with this, there was like, I think the mayor did a little car caravan with census information. I remember I read about it like 2 weeks ago. I don't have exact details, but the mayor of San Francisco did a quick car caravan. So something that we're gonna try to get working on is a car, not classic car meet, but like just a regular car meet with about 200 vehicles going through the city of San Bernardino, which I think would be amazing to go through just each neighborhood, remind individuals to complete the census, and hopefully it gets the exposure and just the exposure it deserves. And hopefully we can get some. It's still in the planning process. We're gonna meet up actually tomorrow, which I'm really excited about. We have a meeting tomorrow, so hopefully something happens and you guys hear about it and you guys can participate in it too, because that would be really exciting. because one of our hard to count communities are the younger generation. They lack, well, not lack, but they just don't understand the importance of making sure that all their children count. That is one of our hard count communities.
I just wanted to add, everyone is, we've touched on how important the census is for funding and congressional representation and all of that. And Jose had brought up early on, using the information in the social sciences. One of the things that I've been so worried about this year, with people, feeling worried about filling out their surveys, and then also too with COVID-19, just having this information moving forward. So as a historian, I use the census a lot for all kinds of things. Just understanding what jobs people had, who was coming to the United States at the time, who's in California. And it's also just for understanding our own society moving forward. The census is incredibly important on top of all of the stuff that bears directly on our lives in the next decade. So I just wanted to say thanks to all of you guys that are interested and care about this, and everybody that's working at the census. It is just such very important work. So thank you guys for everything you're doing. It really is awesome.
Yeah, Michael brought up something I've been worried about too, which is how might this particular year impact the count on the American Community Survey, which is asked every year, right? How might this year impact how people are represented on that particular instrument, because it does ask about place of birth, I believe, and other questions that people might not want to answer. And if they can skip, that's fine. But obviously that's fine. But if we were to compare, let's say, American community surveys and who answered in the past versus, let's say, next year when it comes out, then what changes might we see, and who decides not to answer? Like if it does capture non-citizens in the past, then what happens? How do those numbers change in the coming years? Something that I'll be watching. I'll be paying attention.
Thanks, Jose. I saw that Robbie Madrigal joined us, and I just wanted to say thank you to Robbie and the FAO Library for boosting this event. So I wasn't the only one pestering you with emails about the event. We also got some email blasts from the FAO Library. But thank you, Robbie, for boosting this event. I want to leave room for opening. Yeah, I like this idea, Daisy. Yeah, I don't want to wrap up when the conversation's still going. So Nathaniel, please join in.
I would like more of a descriptive of how that would work. I'm reading it and what Daisy Campos commented, and if you can explain that a little bit more, please.
Okay, just trying to unmute. Yeah, so for example, I know that TikTok has been a really effective platform. It's fun, and a lot of what's happening is specific communities are using their local traditional clothes, using traditional dances, their language. I know for us, we have a red scarf that's really representative of our community. And, you just pass it down. And really what it's putting on display is just pride in your local culture and your community. And it's being shared quite widely. And it's really capturing the specificity of local indigenous communities. And I think that would be a really great segue to be able to kind of take that cultural pride, right, and then translate that and connect that with the census. That was my comment. And I'd be happy to share some of these videos that have been going around. It would be, I think, a really great project and segue.
I would like to add, Daisy, what I can do, because I'm not the specialist on the native tribes, I can get the contact that is for our natives, and I can give that information. If I can maybe have your email, and I can forward that information, because I think that TikTok idea, that it's great. I really loved it. And maybe that's something that we can implement and add it on our campaign.
Absolutely.
As folks, Maria, as needed to drop, head off to other meetings. As folks need to leave, please, please feel free. Thank you so much, Maria. We will continue the conversation though, because connections like these between Natanael and Daisy can lead to really, really wonderful collaborations. So although some folks might need to drop out, I don't want to put a damper on ongoing conversations. I'll do my due diligence as moderator and wrap things up when they are ready to be wrapped up. But really nice nice ideas. I love the idea of a viral video sort of countering. We were talking. Christine brought up this great idea of how do you counter this kind of this sort of saturation of intimidation that can go into this with a long history of things like Jim Crow and redlining and institutional racism. How do you counter something like that? And from young people, they're forced to be reckoned with. And as much as I'm an old Luddite and fuddy-duddy when it comes to social media, if that's what's gonna counter things, if relieving people's anxiety or stress or worry about an institution like the census and its role in their lives comes through TikTok, I think that's exciting, and it sort of bypasses a lot of the more traditional doorbell ringing, although I'm sure that has to happen as well. But changing the face of the census is a challenge in the same way I would say changing the face of basic voting is. So whereas we have enormous enthusiasm in presidential campaigns among young people, and this is directed with a not very formidable nudge at our students. Although there's an enormous amount of enthusiasm around presidential campaigns or around political movements, there needs to be that representation, that presence on election day, and also the help from energetic young people of getting others to the polls. So in that way, I think there's a parallel maybe between the role of the federal government in our lives in the census, but also in elections. So the work that Natanael and Melissa and Ciera are doing is really, really exciting to me, because it goes an enormously long way when it comes from somebody without a gray beard like Jose and me. If it comes from you guys, it's going to make a big difference. It's going to make a dent when you say, when you tell your peers, when you tell your colleagues, especially when you're exceptionally gifted and admired young people on campus, when you take that message to your peers, that makes a big difference. And I really want to amplify that because that kind of countering to the insidious narratives that are injected into our conversation around voter suppression, around in an effort to decrease census representation, again, whether it comes from the bully pulpit or anywhere else, needs to be countered in a really nimble way. And that's where young people come in. That's where you guys have to come in, Natanael and Ciera and Melissa and others. It needs to be countered in that really effective, creative, and nimble way. And you guys have got what it takes. So it gives me a lot of hope to see you guys on the front lines of this.
Thank you. And I think, so just to touch on that, I'm going to nerd out here for a minute, but like I do research on why like young people don't vote. And I think a really creative way to like maybe market the census to younger people is giving them a sense of control. Because when we look at young people and why they don't vote, a lot of young people did turn out in 2016, but there's a lot. So what I study is political efficacy, and there's two types. There's internal political efficacy, which is I have the ability to make correct, informed political decisions. And then there's external political efficacy, which is when I do take political action, it has a causal effect. When I vote, my vote matters. And I think in 2016, when Clinton won the popular vote but didn't win the electoral college, there was a sense of like disenfranchisement with, why am I going to vote if my vote doesn't matter, essentially? So when interacting with young people, I think it's really important that we stress you will be counted. Like, all you have to do is respond and you will be counted. Your responses will be heard. You will be, your response is getting counted no matter what. So all you have to do is respond. You don't have to vote and hope that things go your way. As long as you respond, you will be counted, and there's nothing that can interfere with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just to echo what both of you guys were just saying too, the other thing I always, because I get that sentiment a lot too about 2016. So I'm always trying to advocate as much as I can that the only way to make a change, right, and even if that is to have conversations about the Electoral College, is for people to continually go and vote, right? And if things continue to be lopsided, that's the only way we're going to make a change and to make that point. So that's awesome. And it's just fantastic. You guys are doing what you're doing. It really is great.
Thanks both. And you win this conversation with detail, with specificity, with knowledge, with facts, but also with TikTok videos, I think, and reaching people with really familiar and fun things like a caravan, like something that's really present. But advocacy of the kind that you guys are doing is really exciting, I think. Does anybody else want to jump in with any parting thoughts? I will have this video will be recorded. I'll see about possibly posting it to the History Club's YouTube page, which might be a little easier for you guys to access than a Zoom recording. But that will happen hopefully in the next week or so, depending on my internet connection, the strength of my internet connection, in terms of uploading that. Please, Melissa, go ahead.
Thank you, Jeremy. I just wanted to follow up with what Michael said before, is that he relied heavily on the census data for what happened hundreds of years before, back in the days. And sometimes people say, okay, well, you're gonna share my information, where I was living and what I was doing. I just want to keep in mind and remind everybody that it is protected under Title 44. So what this means is that this information, we're not going to share it until 72 years from now. Right now, we're waiting for the records of 1950. So just to let everybody know that probably I'm 32. So my grandchild or children, they're going to know that Melissa was living in San Bernardino when I'm 100 years. So by that time, we are safe. So I just want to let everybody know. And talking about historic as well, with the census, we know that we failed back in the days, maybe sharing that information. But also we have the proof on the 9/11, when we had our president, George W. Bush, he requests some information as well from certain people in a specific. And because information was protected under Title 13, he couldn't get that information. So just to remind everybody that their answers, they're secure, and we're not gonna betray that information. And if any information from any census employee they share, the fines are extremely heavily. We can get a fine of $250,000. We can get in prison for 5 years, or we can even get both. So we're not gonna do anything with that information, and just to let the public and let the community that is safe and secure, and we need to encourage people to really participate, especially for our Latino community. And that's what I wanted to add.
That is a nice point to wrap up with, Melissa, and I like the specificity of the punishment that anybody has awaiting for them if they violate the confidentiality. Did anybody have any other closing thoughts? That was great, Melissa. Ciera or Jose to wrap things up? No?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming out. It's one thing for us to think it's important and do work on it, but it's really reassuring to see so many different people from so many different departments and entities on campus come together to discuss something as important as a census that is going to affect us for the next decade. So just thank you so much for to the other panelists, Dr. Murray for moderating. It's been fantastic. So really great thing to be a part of, and I just really appreciative.
Yeah, thanks for organizing this, Jeremy. I think this all went well, and I was glad that we got the turnout that we did. So pretty proud of that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jose and Ciera, and also Natanael and Melissa for jumping in at the last minute. Michael for sharing his thoughts. Christine and Hunter, great comments, everybody. This was really informative for me, really helpful for me. It's a little bit selfish. I organized this so that I could learn a little bit more about it, but also to obviously share these really great resources. We've got emails listed in the chat. I am going to finalize this recording and share it widely. My email is there in the chat. If anybody wants to email me, please do pester me for the video. That'll keep me working on it. In spite of my internet connection here, I'll get it done. But I really, again, want to say just one more time how cool it is to have an event. I think this is the first time I've done interdisciplinary events before. This is the first time I've had a student, staff, faculty event. It's very, very cool. I'm excited. I'm going to do more of it because that's just a wonderful confluence of really important perspectives for our campus to bring that particular kind of cross section, not just across departments with faculties, with our egghead perspectives, but bringing in. Although you'll soon be joining us, Ciera, in that group over at University of Michigan. So congratulations on that. But the activist element, the student element, the staff, the faculty element, all these coming together, I think has made this a really informative, really enjoyable event. It seemed to move very quickly to me. It seemed to move very, very quickly with lots of really good information. So let's leave it there for today, unless anybody has any final comments. I really want to thank our panelists, Jose, Maria, who had to step out for a meeting, Ciera, Melissa, and Natanael, and everybody else who joined in with really valuable comments. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for everybody joining. I'm going to shut things down, and you know where to find me if you have any questions.
I just wanted to say that real quick that, all of these people who have these myths and these fears and what have you, it's just, those are the people who I just think that there should be more of this opportunity for people to be invited to get the information, because, it's like they're holding on to false information. And if they have these fears, well, and